I want to introduce you guys to Kate. And Kate has an amazing story, and I'm going to ask her to share a little bit more about it. But you guys know that we've been talking about Kate's book, Dear Family, which is this book right here. I keep my copy right here handy with me. I love it. Everybody talks about the cover and how amazing the cover is. So I want to ask you a question about that in a little bit. But I want to introduce you guys to Kate real quick and give you an idea of who she is. So Kate is a family addiction expert. She's a catalyst for change who's been inspiring recovery and healing since she got sober herself in 2013. After facing and overcoming her own battle with substance use, Kate saw and felt the missing piece at the Recovery Initiative tipping point. She has since made it her life's mission to bring families into the recovery conversation. That is really what I want to talk about with you today, Kate. Tell us a little bit about yourself, to go beyond that intro that I just made. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up here and the work that you're doing every single day.
Yeah, I think, I don't know why, but it just came to my mind. My first career was early childhood, and I built community. I built a nonprofit with 3 facilities, and I'm doing the same thing now. I'm building community with families. And back then it was 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. And, we talked about feelings, and we talked about coping, and we talked about separation anxiety. And I feel like it's the exact same thing, but with a different population, right? With families of addicts. So how about how I came to this work? Yeah. So when I got sober, I thought, what am I going to do? Because I was taught to get a get well job, and I took that really seriously. I had always had my own business, and I did not want a business in this field. I was very clear that I did not, and tried really hard not to. But then when I worked in the field as a case manager and as a counselor and a clinician, or not a clinician, but as a, peer counselor and peer recovery coach in the emergency room, it was in those jobs in my first 3 years of sobriety that it became very clear to me what I was being called to do. I do believe I was being called to do, because I saw things in a way that from like a high level, almost like I was just dropped on the planet, that made no sense to me. And it was in this period of a few years that it was very clear to me that there was some paths that were being identified. I, on the other hand, didn't feel up for it. So it took a few years of more work and a lot of inner work for me to get the inside courage that I believe the outside world was, or universe, whatever you want to call it, my God, my higher power, was inviting me to look at. So I felt no choice but to follow the paths that I was seeing as these gaping cracks in the systems of care.
So Kate, tell me a little bit about, so most people, when they do this work, you're sober yourself, and you have been for a long time. A couple days, as my friend Jeff, you got a couple 24s, as my friend Jeff says. And most of us, when we're in that world, we think, oh, I need to support the addict. I want to support people who went through what I went through. What made you look at this from the other side of it and say, I want to focus on the family?
So the short answer is because I saw how mad everybody was at the addict. But let me back up and say I did work with the individuals with addiction first, for the first few years. That was my primary objective. Oh, I have to go help people with what the hell just happened? What was that? When I started to wake up and get sober, I was like, what was that? Who is that person that I became? And I had to go tell other people and help. And there were a couple of incidences in these jobs that got me in touch with families. Here's one. I was working as a case manager in a detox, and the whole job of a case manager in a detox is to help people stay longer, go to more treatment, right? Commit to themselves. And this one girl, after she had been in 7 times, and she was so close to going to a 6-month program that I got her a bed in. And the last day of her detox, she said, no, I'm going to go home. My mom said I can come home. I have 2 small kids. I know what I need to do. I'm going to go to meetings. That afternoon, before she discharged, I was coming up in the elevator from lunch. It was a public building with a lot of different offices. And this woman was in the elevator. She was crying. And I just naturally said, because it was just the 2 of us in there, are you okay? And she said, I'm so upset. My daughter said there are no beds. I have to pick up my daughter. Now, I said, "What's your daughter's name?" I couldn't tell her that I knew her daughter, but she just said Amanda. And that's the girl that had just told me after being offered a bed, "No, I'm going to decline that bed. I'm going home. My mother said I can come home." Well, here's a mom saying, "My daughter said there are no beds." That was my very first moment of being on that side of the table and realizing that the lying that we do is killing us. And so I remember thinking, oh my God, the mother thinks there's no bed. There's a bed. I know I can't say anything because of HIPAA, but I went marching off that elevator to my boss. I was so new in the field and so naive. I thought my boss was going to go, "Oh, here's what we do in that situation. We'll fix this." Because I was like, "There's a problem." She was like, "What happened?" I said, "Amanda said no to the bed. Her mother thinks there's no beds. There is a bed. Like, fix this." And the boss looked at me and she said, "You can't tell her the truth." And I remember standing there and my head was almost ready to explode. And I thought to myself, nobody's getting better in this scenario. Addiction's winning. And it made no sense to me. And I would run around and talk to people like, "Don't you see what a problem this is?" And nobody was really picking up what I was laying down. They were like, yeah, that's just how it is. That's how, and I'm like, and the same thing happened when I worked doing overdose intervention in the emergency room. People aren't even notified when we experience a non-fatal, event like that. And they were just being discharged within an hour. And like, they just straight up were unalived, and nobody's helping this person because they don't know they need help. They have a disease that resists the help. So I started to run a family support group, to answer your question, but I saw the families in the dark throughout these few years. And I remember I started the group only to teach families that your loved one is not just an asshole, because that's what I would hear. "He's such an asshole. She's such a liar. They're so manipulative." And what I've started to realize is most of these families see their isolated loved one. They don't know we're all that way. And no one was really telling them that. So I showed up in this support group simply to be an ally for that person whose family was pissed off or scared to the point of chaos. And so that's why I did it, because I started to see they're in the dark. They're completely left in the dark, out of the conversation, not brought to the table by us, because most of us are compartmentalizing and trying to keep our stuff to ourselves for lots of reasons. And so they're powerless, and they shouldn't be. So when I started to teach them what I did, they'd start out by saying, "She's so manipulative." Well, let me tell you how I was manipulative. I just started to try to normalize what was, to me, what everybody was experiencing that they just didn't know. And so that's why. And it was hard working with families initially, really hard, because they don't understand us like at all. And so the reason I started the company was after 2 years of working with families, literally, Austin, almost every single one of their loved ones were sober, just by them learning. And that's when I realized I have to do this. Families must be brought to the table.
Kate, can you tell me a little bit about the difference between like what you're doing at Tipping Point, and through your group and through Facebook and through your work on through the book and on TikTok and all the social media outreach that you're doing, and a more traditional program like Al-Anon? Yeah. And not to denigrate with the work that Al-Anon is doing, which I know you don't do, but how do you see your two programs as different?
Right. So that whole 3 years on working in these programs, working with families, I just pushed Al-Anon all the time. And I found literally about 1% of the people would go or go back a second or third time. So I was having a lot of resistance from people not wanting to go. And those that did go started to get somewhat better. What's different about what we're doing is it's Al-Anon plus guidance. So we don't tell people there's nothing they can do. And we don't tell people, I don't believe that people have to want it. And that is way against the mainstream, even among a lot of us. So families call this program Al-Anon on steroids, Al-Anon for the modern day, Al-Anon, 100 Al-Anon meetings in an hour is what one guy said. That felt like 100 Al-Anon meetings. So it's more, it's answering questions, and you don't get guidance at Al-Anon.
Right. Yeah. Talk a little bit more about, we hear this all the time, and you and I have talked about this a million times, I think, already in the short time that we've known each other. The idea that they have to want it, that the addict has to want it. And you talk about this in your book, and it's one of the first like big marked out, highlighted. Tell me a little bit about what your take on that concept is.
I have a physical reaction when I hear that, and I hear it a lot, and I'm sure there are people here that are used to saying it. It happens in my lives too. And what we mean when we say that is people need to have a certain level of internal motivation to make change. That's what we mean. But you don't have to have a lot, and you can manufacture that willingness actually by changing the way you respond to them. And so it infuriates me, because when I was really sick and suffering, people said, you must not want it. And if they only knew how bad I wanted it, I just couldn't say it. Or I didn't want you to know it, or my sister, or my parents, right? Or my kids. So what I say is there's always this much, maybe it's this tiny, but there's always a small part of your loved one that wants it. They're just not operating from that frame because they're addicted. Which I say that way because I don't think we don't even really understand what that means. If when you're addicted, you can't stop. And so it's not that we don't want it. It's that we can't access it. We don't have the internal resources in order to express that want. It's a disease filled with shame and guilt and self-hatred. And for me, and I know you and I have talked about this, I didn't even start to want it until I had it. Mm-hmm. And that's a deadly catch-22 in my opinion. And so, yeah, I can't stand that statement. They do want.
It's funny. What I wanted was for my life to not be hard anymore. That's what I wanted. Pam, thank you so much. I just wanted life to be easier. But what I couldn't see at the time was that the thing that was making my life hard was my addiction. I thought all the other things were causing problems in my life, but I wasn't really willing to look at my addiction to alcohol as the problem. Right. It was like this unique. And Pam's great at sending these hats, by the way.
I love it. Those are so cute.
Yeah. I want to talk about a couple of sections of the book really quick. There is, can you talk about the finding your lane exercise? You talk about this in the What's Your Loop chapter. It's actually on page 117. You start to introduce this concept of finding your lane exercise. And one of the things I think that we hear in this group and in other groups is, how do I understand what is my part and what is their part? And I thought that you did such a good job of laying this out. And I'm not going to lie, I had to read this section a couple times to really wrap my head around it. So can you talk a little bit about this exercise?
Yeah. So I'll just talk about what the loop is. My whole methodology is based on your loved one is spiraling because they're addicted to drugs and alcohol. And it's likely, if you're close by, that you're spiraling in some way. And the way for you to get out of your own chaos and their chaos is to start to identify the ways that you've become unwell as a result of your fear, your anger, your confusion, the ways that you're feeling unsettled. So families identify that their own loop that they're in, because we're in one, right? Our brain is hardwired to do one thing. What are you hardwired to do? Are you trying to help? Are you trying to be the case manager of the family? Are you trying to stop the addiction? Are you in obsessive worry? And once you identify what your loop is, then you can start to address it. And the exercise of finding your lane. So my favorite way to do this with people is for them to give me some words of a current situation, whether it's a text message from their addict or whether it's just their narrative. And when people write out the words, I literally take sentence by sentence. So here's an example. My son contacted me. He had totaled the car and he needed to get to work. I said, well, what's yours and what's his there? So he totaled the car. Whose is that? Is it my responsibility to clean that up, or is it his responsibility to clean that up? So that's the exercise, is basically helping people see what's ours to manage and what's not ours to manage. Mm-hmm. And we get really confused about what's not ours to manage as family because we want to help. And so what's really important is I want families to find their own lane. And I mean by that, what's your recovery path? Because so if my loved one totals their car, I have feelings about that. Those are mine. What happens to the car is not mine. What happens to how they get to work? It's not mine. I can make it mine by accepting a request. Could I drive them to work? But it's really stopping and realizing how much of what we do on a daily basis is like none of our business. right?
Yeah, Kate, how would you see someone stepping in, like when you're working with a family and before they've gone through this work? In that situation, how would you see a family member stepping in that situation?
Oh, what do I see as ways that, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
when they're stuck in the
yeah.
tangled mess.
Yeah. So when I first do a consultation with people, we have a whole bunch of questions we ask them, and it is, what's currently going on, right? What's the current scenario? And I hear things like recently I heard he totaled 12 cars. He has 8 open warrants, and the parents were paying all of that off. And so that's one way people get involved. Or I gave him a car. Does he have a car? Does he have a license? Yes, I gave him. Is the car his? Yes. Whose name is it in? Well, it's in my name. Or who's paying for it? Well, I am, because he doesn't have a job yet. So taking on the responsibility of, because we think it's helpful. And here's another one. A grandparents came to a support group and they said, when my grandson graduates from this program, I'm going to buy him a car. Now, this grandfather was used to the framework in the world where when people graduate from college, you might buy them a car. Mm-hmm. So when he finished treatment, the grandfather saw him as recovered and he wanted to get him a car. The whole room was like, no, don't do that. An active addict or someone that's newly sober might sell that car. I mean, we don't know that they're going to do that. They might actually be really grateful for the car. So I don't make those decisions for people. But what we do is we let people know that there are some things to look at. So those are just some examples. It often involves time, energy, attention, money, resources that are appearing to be support.
Yeah. In addiction, I think we talk about this every single day, like slowing the system down, right? Like it's once you disengage that prefrontal cortex, once you start to get away from the decision making, all those kinds of things, it's really hard to stay in sobriety, right? Because we're gonna fall back on old habits. We're gonna pick up again because it's the thing we know. Do you see that same thing with families?
100%. And so the language I use is very similar to our language. I want families to identify the ways they've become unwell and identify the role they're playing that isn't healthy. And I want them to detox. Mm-hmm. So I use words like detox. I use words like relapse. I love that you say return to use. I still do use the term relapse as well. And maybe return to behavior. Families return to that behavior almost all the time. Usually within 24 hours, they've forgotten that they were going to withdraw or detox from a certain behavior. Sure. Because they're hardwired in their brains as well. And let's just face it. Let's say this at the top, right? We're not at fault for trying to help in the way we help. I don't want people to be hating on themselves or feeling all, beating themselves up, or I should know better. It's like, especially when it comes to parents, our DNA is wired to care for and love our young, right? Mm-hmm. And our partners. A lot of us have codependent behaviors, and we're used to taking care of others. So it's really normal to want to care for and love. But when you learn that you're doing it in ways that are actually contributing to the problem, you want to stop. Yeah. Yes, we return to use. Families return to use. It
sounds like part of that work is helping them slow down and understand like exactly how they can approach each one of these problems and get kind of recentered.
And we see, and this is me polling our clients in our long-term program. I've asked them, how long do you think it takes for you to settle in here? They say about 3 months. It's about 90 days. Very similar to us.
Yeah. Kate, tell me a little bit about, I loved in the book, you have these kind of diagnostic tools. That's what I'm going to call them because I don't have a better word for it. You have a better word for it.
The assessments.
The assessments. Thank you. And talk to me a little bit about where that came from and how you really incorporated that into the book. Because in the book, it's not just, I'm surprised, and I know we've been talking about this in our group here for a while, but like how informational the book is. It is not just, this is what I've seen. It is, this is how you can approach this problem by using this tool. And what made you decide to include those assessments in there?
Well, because recovery is an action word. And I've created a family recovery model. I did not create it by myself. So you ask where it came from. It all came from conversations like this. Literally from the moment I was in that elevator with Amanda's mother, asking my boss to fix the problem. And she said, you can't, and just pretend it didn't happen, to every conversation I've ever had with every family. This all came out of that. So those assessments came out of my observation. I think I became obsessed with family recovery. because when I started to, I'm not going to lie, for about a month, I thought I had solved the problem of addiction. Like I got a little bit kind of big, and I caught myself fortunately really quickly, but the results were so outrageous in the beginning when I was really hands on with a lot of families that I was like, everybody needs to know this. Now, addiction's more of a beast than that, and it's not the solution, but it is a powerful one, because when you're empowering everyone around the chaos does go away, and it doesn't get kicked out or cut off, but it minimizes drastically. So everything that is in here was a result of me. Like I'd talk to families every day. We're talking like, I don't even know how many hours of conversation, but I started to become a student of these observations, right? I was taking notes, tons and tons of journaling and charts. And so I started to see patterns and themes. And then when I started to really write this book, that's where the assessments came from. Was it's noticing the patterns in people's behaviors. And yeah. That is the question.
The assessments, I think, are really powerful because it does, like, as someone looking in at this problem and thinking about, I was thinking about my mom when I was struggling with my addiction and how frustrating it was for her, and she didn't know what to do, and she didn't have the tools necessary either. Like, I don't even think that people could identify what the problem necessarily was. For a long time, it was just there was an issue, but nobody could quite put their finger on. One of the things I liked about it was you answer these questions, and then it's kind of like a choose your own adventure book, if you remember those, because it was like you figure out where you're at on this chart, and then there are specific things that, like, you're at this point and this is probably what you're going to need, and this is how you can approach it. And so instead of it just being linear, the book, it feels like a little bit of a choose your own path.
Yeah, I actually just noticed a question. Would this book be a good tool for a family member of an addict, or is it just for the addict? No, it's 100% for the family. Yeah, it's a guide, and I'm very practical. That's the other thing I noticed. I'm a good teacher. I'm a good amplifier of messages, and I'm also a good amplifier of people's learning. So in these communities that we were creating, I can tell when someone's at an edge of growth, and I'll amplify that, and then everybody learns. And so the assessments, it's really interesting. I have a person that works in the field doing interventions that I know well, and he just told me he scored really low on these assessments. And I said, no surprise there, because like you said, no, that there was even a problem.
Right.
I will tell you, a lot of people read this book and they kind of go, all right. They got to step back for a minute to really digest. It's like there's not much in here, but there's a lot,
I was disappointed the first chapter I read that I didn't have a highlighter with me. And I had to go back and reread the first chapter, because we get this question all the time in this live. Every single day that we do this, we're getting questions. How can I help my family member? How can I support myself? How can I support someone else in my family that's struggling? What should I do? Should I step in? Should I step back? And so we're getting those questions. And I will tell you, I found you because I was getting this question every single day.
Wow.
Every day. How can I help my family member? How can I help my brother? Someone's getting out of a residential facility. What should I do? How should I support my husband? And I was at a complete loss. And then I stumbled across your live one day, and I was like, this is exactly who I need to talk to.
I'm so happy.
The book came out, I started reading it immediately. And the thing that I found with this book was, not only do I feel like I'm better equipped to answer people's questions, at least to say, hey, I know where you can go, but I feel like I learned things about my recovery from this book as well. It is, and I think that's most of the people here that have read the book are not helping a family member, they're helping themselves. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about that? Like, you wrote this for family recovery, but you're yourself in recovery.
Yeah,
did you write it with this in mind, that it was going to help both?
Well, I work with 3 sets of people. I work with treatment centers hire us to run their family program. So I've written it with the lens of treatment centers, families, and the individual. Because I learned back when I was working on that grant in the ER, I don't want to work in isolation with one or the other. I want to work with everybody. You know the Venn diagram when the inside, I want to work in that inside bubble only, because outside bubble is just compartmentalized, and it's also lies and co-signing BS on the outside,
Hmm.
especially when it's with the addiction, right?
Right.
So I want to work at the, I realized in these jobs that I don't want to work in the problem.
Hmm.
I can't work in the problem, actually. It's not part of my makeup. I can't do the same thing every day when it's banging our head against the wall. I need to work with improved outcomes. So that's partly why. And it's interesting. I love the feedback from people. So it's really helpful for me to hear that you learned a lot about your own recovery, because that lens, I believe, is when I went into AA, which is where I got sober.
Hmm.
I remember looking up at the window. It was the dark basement church, and there's this tiny little light. And I remember looking up, going, the whole world does not know what's going on down here, and they need to. So I remember hearing I had a thinking problem, a decision making problem. And I remember thinking, oh, that's not what my family thinks. My family thinks I'm these things, right? And that I thought too about myself. And that's not the truth.
Hmm.
It's not the truth. We know it's now not a moral failing, yet we're not catching up with how we treat people.
Right.
We haven't caught up with what we now know. And so I do believe it's through the lens of the recovered person,
Hmm.
right? Clearly, that's me. And,
Right.
think about it. I wrote this book to kind of get myself a little off the hook. I wasn't just an asshole, guys. I didn't just lie. I wasn't just a manipulative piece of nothing. And none of us are.
Right.
And we think we are. That's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And when our family believes that too,
Of course, they
right? We
believe
believe
that,
it about ourselves. They believe it about us.
and they
How are we
believe it
going to get
about us
better?
rightly so, because we're
Yeah.
acting that way.
Yeah.
What other disease causes people? I mean, the one I'm seeing lately, if you some of the TikToks I see on dementia, people lose the executive functioning, they lose the rational thinking, and they're pretty nasty. Well, guess what? We do too.
Hmm.
So what if a doctor said, hey, I'm going to diagnose you, Austin, and your wife's in the room with you. We're going to diagnose you with substance use disorder. There's a few things you guys got to know about this. He's
Hmm.
going to start presenting as lying, denying, manipulating, compartmentalizing. So, wife, you're going to want to respond in this way. And you're right in the room. That's what I do. I
Yeah.
say to the wife, the spouse, the parent, right in the room with you. And no one disagrees with me. So I look at you and I say, hey, so if you want to stay sober, you're going to love that I'm going to get her off your back. If you don't want to stay sober, you're not going to like me, because I'm teaching her the truth about your disease that you can't tell because your disease is primary.
Hmm.
It's so obvious to me.
Yeah. We talked about this the other day on your live. We were having this conversation.
Right.
I was chatting with you, and I like this idea of the diagnosis. I mean, and in the work that I do, I work with nonprofits as well. And, they have all these resources that are available to everyone who's now become involved in this diagnosis: family, grandparents, parents, friends. We inform the schools. We're like, everyone gets brought in on this conversation about this new diagnosis. And we don't do that with addiction. As a matter of fact, we often struggle in our addiction out loud. We're very vocal, people can see it, and then we get really quiet when we get sober, and we retreat and we try and hide away.
Yeah.
And
We have a lot of work to do, because for hundreds of years we were stuck away in institutions. They didn't know what to do with us, and because of our behavior, we're not treating it according to what we now know.
mhm,
So what you just described that you're doing in your nonprofit, that's what I want to do.
mhm,
So you and everyone else here watching need to join us, because we have way too big a mission. This is not about me.
right.
It's not about me.
No, this to me is like, we talk about this every day, this idea of recovering out loud, and how can we recover out loud so that we can say, hey, we've been through this, we understand this, and we have resources available. And we're building this incredible community of people with resources. Not just me. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about how we're gonna solve this problem so that we can have more people find recovery.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Kate, I want to ask you a question about one thing in your book. On page 49, you said that the idea ties back that you can't force someone to recover, but it overlooks the fact that there are a huge number of things families can do to increase their loved one's chance of recovery. And I think I've said this myself, can't force someone to get sober. And then I'm like, well, shit, now I don't know what else to say. So that's the end of my sentence.
Mm. Mm.
Can you share a couple of the things that are in here? I don't expect you guys. If you don't buy this, I'm going to do a pitch for you, Kate.
Do it. Yeah.
You have to buy this book, and I will tell you why you need to buy it. It is because it is so filled with these kinds of things. Because as people in recovery, when we're recovering out loud, we are going to have people ask us these questions. People come to us and they say, Austin, I know you're sober. How did your mom do it? How did you do it? What should I do? And if I don't have the resources, at least know where to send somebody, I've failed on my end. That's my opinion. So, can you share a couple things that families can do?
Yeah. Somebody's saying, I wish I could screen record this and show it to my mom. So we can help you with places to send your mom, because I'm assuming it's a family. You're recovering and your mom needs this. So yeah, this is trap number 2, thinking there's nothing you can do. And I don't like people in my community saying there's nothing I can do. I tell them to catch themselves. Not in my surroundings. I don't want to hear that. Now, if you say it, that's fine. Just catch yourself. And then not only is there a lot you can do, and I'll give some of the things, there's a lot you're probably doing that you shouldn't be doing that isn't helpful. That's even more important, I think, or as important.
Mm-hmm.
So what can you do? You can learn about this disease. And I'm going to challenge anyone that tells me they think they understand this disease. Even if you have it, in my opinion, we don't fully understand it until you really dive into the science behind it, to the brain, to the body, to the psyche, to trauma, to the cells in our body, to all the things that happen. We've got to understand addiction, because it is not about drugs and alcohol. It has nothing to do with drugs and alcohol. That's not the problem. And then, so understand addiction. I also think people can, here's what you can do, understand the ways that.
Oh, we just lost you for a second, Kate. There you go. Back. We lost that little section.
Understand the ways that you might be participating in the problem. You might be caught up in someone else's loop. And here are some of the ways you might be caught up. Are you funding something? And people often say, I'm not giving any more money. It's really not that. You might be funding something that is taking away the opportunity for your loved one to kind of chop the wood and carry the water in early recovery. So there are nuanced ways that we might be funding this problem and not the solution. So we also want to notice the patterns of how we become unwell and how we're treating people in our lives. How we're allowing ourselves to be treated is another one. Mm-hmm. Really, when someone is hurting us, we are allowing them to hurt us. That's where you have your power. You can take your power back. You can take your voice back. We're walking on eggshells. How much are you walking on eggshells? Learn how to stand up for yourself in a way that actually is kind. Learn a boundary, which isn't about a consequence for them. It's for you. People don't understand boundaries. It's actually, someone recently told me, this is like life living stuff. This isn't just about, right? It's like how to upgrade your life. Mm-hmm. Here's another one. Do you believe your loved one can recover? Do you believe that they can do this? Most people say it's not a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. Right. That's important information to know. If you're walking around with this belief that they can't, do you think that might be impacting you or them?
Yeah, that mindset, we talk about this. People are like, I can't get to day 3. I can't get past day 3. Well, if you're constantly telling yourself you can't, I can't do it, the odds of you doing it are pretty slim. If your loved one, if you're saying, well, they can't recover, this is going to be it forever.
Right. Here's another thing that families can do. Do you know what it takes to recover? Do you know what recovery looks like? Mm-hmm. Do you know it's a lifelong chronic progressive illness with a high rate of recidivism? Do you know what to do in the point of a relapse? Do you know that you can shorten the relapses by how you respond? Mm-hmm. Do you know what to do with your feelings? Right. Well, that's just some of what you can do. It's a lot, by the way. This is not a program for the faint of heart. No. This is not a program for people that are unwilling to look at themselves. I'm asking a lot of people.
Yeah. You have 8 tips here, and I would imagine that there are about 20 some that you left on the cutting room floor when you did this. I want to ask about your last one. We talk about this all the time. That's why we're here every day. Find your people. How important is it for family members to find a community?
Oh, it's enormously important, because many, many, many family members are still hiding. they're hiding from certain family members. There's a lot of division in families because people don't want other people to know because we're trying to manage how we're perceived or how our loved ones perceive. So there's a lot of hiding, which really is it's just shutting off parts of yourself. It's really not living. You need to find your people so you have that courage to start to be able to own the problem yourself first. It helps us have rigorous honesty by being with others. You could come to a meeting and say nothing and be there for 3 solid months and gain a ton just by listening. If you don't feel comfortable even coming off camera, right? In some of these meetings that are on Zoom. But yeah, you got to find your people. We also learn, like the families that are in my program, some of them have been with us for a few years. So they're like really on a solid path. A newcomer comes in and they're like, yikes. So it reminds you of where you used to be and where you could go should you choose to leave your program. It's very similar to us.
Yeah. Tell everybody that's here a little bit more about what you offer at Tipping Point as far as like the spectrum of support.
Yeah. So we offer family recovery school. That's what we're starting to call it. It's like, you got to learn all about addiction. You got to learn all about the family disease of addiction, and you got to learn what it takes to recover for both of you. And so we have a whole curriculum that's, good 10, 12 weeks. And then we have a long-term program. So it's kind of like we have the inpatient and we have the sober house, because the families that take the, 8 to 12 week program can stay for a year if they want. And most do, because they find it as their place. So it's a recovery community with a very high rate of success, because everyone around the alcoholic is getting sober, emotionally sober from the effects of addiction. And we do interventions and family case management. So we're an independent private practice for interventions around the country. And we also offer a service for treatment centers. And I got to share something about this because this is mind blowing. Treatment centers have a rate of people leaving early. It's a problem. Like Amanda leaving treatment, not going on to her further treatment, the story I told. So a lot of treatment centers report 30 to 40% of people don't complete treatment. They end up going home early. And that's when they have their return to use, because they're not ready to go home to a non-sober environment. The treatment centers that work with us and their families are in our program, they see a 0% AMA rate. They see 100% completion. So what does that say? When families are in a program, when your loved one is in a program, your loved one has a far greater chance of not returning to use when they go home, because you're all sober.
That's fantastic. That's amazing. I know that you have information coming out about your success rate soon, and I know that you're
I don't know how soon. We're going to do a report.
Good.
But it's going to be an outside agency. It's probably going to be a long-term study. I'm hoping it's in a year, but I don't know.
Yeah. Kate, could you do me a favor and speak to the people that are here that are in recovery and that are having people come to them and saying, what should I do? What should I do with my friend Paul or me or someone else who is the person in recovery? I'm struggling with my husband. I'm struggling with my father. I do not know what to do.
They're struggling with an alcoholic.
They're struggling with an alcoholic in their life. They're looking at us saying, hey, I always tell people I was the problem. I didn't know what the solution was. I was the problem one. So I'm bad to give advice to this. What can I tell people? What would you recommend the first thing a family member does in order to take the first tiny baby step in the right direction?
Well, because what you're describing is, so even though they're recovering people, they're family. They're right there. So I would say get the book.
I love it.
Number one. Number two, make your statements I statements. Meaning, talk to your person about how what they're doing is impacting you, but do it from I'm feeling this way, right? Start to attend meetings for you as a family member and start talking about your meeting. So rather than, did you go to a meeting? I'm having a response to how you're acting. I'm going to get to a meeting. Start modeling your own behavior. Those are the beginning. And what ways to get really further into it, what ways are you helping them that might not be helpful? I will say too, it's often not real close family members that are going to be the one that's going to say the thing that's going to get someone to go off to a long-term treatment. It's not usually us as family. you know?
Yeah.
Did that answer your
It did
question?
answer my question. Yeah. I want everybody here to know that I think that we have a role to play as people in recovery, um, in these conversations, because we often are the first people come to, especially if you're recovering out loud, because family members, like, so I've had so many people come to me and say, how do I help? I'm not struggling with addiction, but how do I help my husband? How do I help my brother? How do I do, what can I do? And I think that because of our position in the world as recovering out loud and saying, hey, we overcame this, people feel free to come to us because they don't know who else to turn to.
Right.
So I have to tell you, the work that you are doing blows my mind.
Mm.
I am totally enthralled with what you've been able to accomplish. I think it's amazing that someone is taking on this role of a holistic view
Mm.
of the family dynamic, including the addict, including the family, including treatment, so that you get the best outcome. And I think that that is truly, truly amazing.
Right. I love that you love it, Austin, because to be honest, it was so clear to me. And I go back to Gerard saying it was intuitive. To me, it was so intuitive, and I was so confused why it wasn't happening. And I did not feel qualified. I remember thinking, like, how can I do this? This feels really big. So when I hear people say what you're saying, and anyone here that's following both of us that feels this way, then we need to be in this community together, because this is not a one person led thing. I get really excited when people say, this is blowing my mind. I'm like, I know, right? Me too, because I didn't make it up. It literally just kind of came together when the insurance company ever said to me, can you come in and do a presentation on your outcomes? I was like, okay, if insurance is going to start looking at this, then it really, I mean, that was validating, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate that you're saying it, because not everybody gets this. And so when people do get it and they're just like, what? I'm like, I know, right? So you're on the team, whatever it looks like for the future. There's so much to do, so much to do.
This is the amazing thing to me. We have started to scratch the surface of what we can do with addiction and recovery. And like you said earlier, we're learning new things about the brain. We're learning new things about our body. We're learning new things about how alcohol and drugs actually cause these problems. We talk about ACEs scores. We talk about all of these things. Is it genetic or is it something bigger than that? I think that this conversation is just beginning.
Oh yeah.
And I love that we can have these kinds of conversations in a space like this where we've never been able to have conversations like this before.
I know. No, it's really important. Somebody just said they're sitting at work crying. I know that feeling, and you're so seen. And for those people that it just feels like this just makes so much sense. It wasn't rocket science. It was just bringing out the truth to the surface and putting it together. I mean, really, we all know all of this. Someone came on one of my lives once and said, oh, this is just like Al-Anon and AA. I go, exactly. So, and go to Al-Anon and AA every single day for 90 days and tell me you don't get better, but nobody's doing that.
Right?
I, yeah.
There's a quote in your book that I highlighted, I think 4 times, and it is, go to meetings until you like going to meetings. And I like that's sunk into me. I think the fellowship that is available through AA and Smart Recovery and Al-Anon and Dharma Recovery and all is fantastic. And I want people to just find what works for them. A meeting isn't necessarily regulated to AA. It could be anything. But I tell you what, finding a community, finding people you can be honest with, supporting people, being that helping hand does so much for my sobriety.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I am so glad that you came on today. I am so glad that we've met and that we've had a chance to talk so much. I do want to make a pitch for the book again. You guys, seriously, there are so many people here in this group that have bought this book, Dear Family. I talk about it all the time. Can Tracy get the book in the UK?
Can you order on Amazon?
Can you order on Amazon, Tracy? I bet you can.
Yeah.
If you can't, Tracy, I'll figure out how to get you a copy. Barb said earlier she is highlighting in 2 colors. I don't know if you saw her comment. She's highlighting in a color for herself and then a color for her daughter. So she's like breaking the book down into the 2 parts, which I think is great.
Can I say a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Somebody just said they bought 3 books. I want to tell you what I'm hearing so you guys can take this advice. Definitely get a few. People are bringing them to the police department. They're bringing them to their fire station. They're bringing them to their doctor. And as soon as they read it, people are going to get more. They realize it's definitely something they want to hand over. If anybody did want to do like a large order, we can do a bulk rate so they can just be in touch with me. But you said something else. What else was it you said?
Highlighting in 2 colors.
Oh, highlight. Yes. I am very curious how people are perceiving the book, what they're highlighting. So please reach out if you want to chat about what you, I want to know more. Like join our Facebook group, get in, in there, we can do more sharing of things. If people want to share pages they're highlighting, when people say it was so good, I loved it. I'm like, I need more than that. Like, what did you love? How have you changed? What, I'm really, because I'm a student of this work. I'm a creator of this work. There's a second book being written already. I want to know what you like and why. And yeah, of course, any typos or anything that you felt offended by, or like, I really want to know. It's a work in progress.
I think you nailed it with this first one. I can't wait to see what the next one looks like. I am impressed with the work you're doing. I am so glad that you and I have connected. I am excited about what this means for the future, and the work that we're doing here on the chicken every day, and the group of people that are here that now have a new tool that they're armed with into the world, I think is going to change what we're able to do. So thank you from our group for opening our eyes to what's possible.
Yeah, you're so welcome. So the Facebook group is Friends of Tipping Point. Friends of Tipping Point. And if you go follow me here, and I have a link tree with all the links, the Facebook page, the website, the book, all of it.
Fantastic. Kate, any last words before we go?
Just thank you. And really, truly, from my heart to yours, you have a beautiful community. You work so hard at what you do, and you're just so authentic. I'm so excited that TikTok brought us together, and all your followers are just so brave. I guess the last thing I do want to say is if you're recovering and your family doesn't talk to you, I'm very interested in you reading this book, because I'm interested in creating that reverse bridge back. If your family's like completely pieced out, I would love to help you repair and go. And it's almost like the opposite, like bridge, but I would be very interested in hearing how this is landing for you. Maybe there's one we write just for you. I don't know. So
fantastic. Kate, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. I will put out the recording. We'll have some of that going out, and then I'm sure that we'll be connecting again. And I would love to have you back on the show if you're willing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. Talk to you.
Everybody have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the day that you have. Remember, the power to change your life is right here in today. It is not in tomorrow. It's not in yesterday. Small changes today can change your entire life. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. I will see you guys tomorrow, noon, on the chicken. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.